Nitakase damu yako Bwana.
Ladies and gentlemen, when it's Tuesday, it's the Raw Leadership Talk. And I'm glad to be here today with Dr. Paul Kariuki, all the way from Durban, South Africa, ready to bring to you this candid discussion on leadership and governance. Where are you tuning in from? We'll be glad to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from? Are you in Kenya? Which part of Kenya? Are you outside Kenya? Which part of the world are you tuning in from? Talk to us. In a few minutes, we will begin the discussion. Leadership and governance. Leadership and governance. The Raw Leadership Talk is coming to you live from Nairobi, brought to you by the Africa Center for Public Speaking. Where are you tuning in from? You don't want to miss this discussion today. In a moment, we will begin the discussion, taking you to leadership and governance. To hope that music is soothing your soul, even as you get ready for this reflective discussion today. Thank you very much. Dr. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, sir, and I'm glad to be here on this powerful platform.
We are glad you're here too, and we've been looking forward to this wonderful day for this particular discussion on leadership and governance on this third week of the month of June. So maybe you may want to introduce yourself, and we'll dive right into the discussion of the day.
All right, thank you so much, Brother Dan. My name's again is Paul Kariuki. Currently, I'm the executive director of an organization called Democracy Development Program, based here in Durban, South Africa. We have been in existence for the last 27 years, and our work is primarily promoting political cooperation with citizen engagement and civil society strengthening towards promotion of good governance, rule of law, and citizen empowerment towards holding government accountable for all its decisions and actions. So basically, that's what we do, and I'm privileged to serve in that position in leading the organizations toward working across not only our province, but across the country, South Africa. And in the last 3 years, we've now managed to get into the SADC region, serving through partnerships in 7 countries. And just as late as last year, we are connected now to the rest of the continent with about 15 countries across the continent. So a huge responsibility on my shoulders, but by the grace of God, very possible.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the good thing. When we see one of our own doing a good job in another land, we are grateful to God. In a nutshell, Dr. Paul, is there a difference between leadership and governance?
There is, my brother. They look the same, but I would like to start by saying they are the faces of the same coin. On one part, it's leadership. On the other face, it's what I would call governance. So in leadership, one of my key mentors over the years, Dr. John Maxwell, described it as influence and no more or nothing less. And therefore, in simple terms, leadership, in my view, is an interplay of social influential processes, that make a leader to seek permission from those he or she leads, so that they can voluntarily participate in a process that will aim at achieving a common goal or a common vision or a common purpose. So it's a process of social influencing processes that a person seeks to allow permission by others to support that process so that they can achieve a common goal. On the other side, governance is a process that allows accountability to be set up. Because leadership without a mechanism for accountability is destructive leadership. And therefore, you cannot have one without the other. The two must go hand in hand. So one is about influence towards achieving a goal, a collective vision. And the other one, it's a setup of mechanisms to ensure that the leadership that has committed to execute the responsibilities that it has been mutually agreed and given the power to by those that it leads are held accountable for their decisions and for their actions on a daily basis.
I like that part, that governance is the system or process of accountability.
Yes.
I think that's very, very powerful, even as we are starting this particular discussion. But what's your take on African leadership and governance practices so far? What's your take on African leadership and governance practices so far?
Well, that's a very big question, Dan. I'm not so sure our time can allow us to really get into ins and outs of it, but I can respond by saying this. Our country, our continent is emerging from a very difficult space right now, not only just because of the pandemic that hit the continent last year, but other previous public health emergencies that interfered and influenced the way the continent has been preparing itself in terms of managing such big processes that we are seeing right now. But even prior to public health emergencies, our continent has been beleaguered largely with political instabilities, civil wars, and other aspects that have really threatened democratic processes on the continent. So when we talk about leadership practices and governance practices on the continent, we must put this context be in place so that we can understand the journey that has been traveled so far. So we come from a pre-colonial times. Majority of African countries gain independence. They start the self-rule process and phases of their existence. What we have seen in the last decade, post the independent, aside from the younger countries that are coming to independence like South Sudan lately, majority of African countries have had a phase of moving from the revolutionary power that made it possible to gain self-independence from the colonial rule. But after that process, the establishment of democratic processes that will enable effective governance and leadership that appreciates public participation, those parameters have been set up. However, in the last decade or so, we have seen an erosion or a deviation, if I may say so, from those core principles that established effective governance and proper democratic processes, especially the observation of the Constitution and the rule of law. Partly because as the countries have been evolving from colonial rule to self-rule, majority of the countries have been stuck from moving from revolutionary power or movements into democratic spaces, where now it's not about our time to recover what we lost while we fought for independence, to a time of saying now it's a collective process that involves every citizen, and every citizen has a stake in the nation. And so our leadership quagmire has come to that kind of a place, the transitioning from revolutionary power to democratic processes has been beleaguered by the tensions between private interests, whether be they of individuals or political elite, to national processes that allow collective participation in leadership and democratic processes. That tension has not been managed properly, in my view.
Okay. So in your opinion then, following up in the same question, are African nations moving in the right direction then, as far as governance is concerned? Are we in the right direction? Are we in the right trajectory?
it's very hard to say a singular answer about that question because, again, the context is very important here. Different countries are going through different processes, and they're in their own different phases of transition from colonial rule to self-rule, and now into democratic dispensations where the majority do influence how a country is governed. So I can safely say there are signs of good movement towards stable democratic processes. However, there is still a majority of countries on our continent that are still stuck in the transitional phases, which has led to what we've just been seeing lately: increased military coups, for example, because of jostling for power, political power. We have seen increased demonstrations, civic demonstrations in countries where there is a greater disaffection from citizens toward their own governments because of poor public delivery of services, and two, shrinking civic space that allows freedoms of speech and freedoms of expression and other civil liberties that are allowed by constitutions, and very lately seeing a disregard of the rule of law.
In Africa, thank you for that. And I think that is very, very good point in as far as this whole discussion is concerned. But I want us to look at something that we Africans claim most of the time, that governance is interfered by the Western countries. The reason why Africa is not running properly as far as efficient governance or effective governance is concerned is because of the interference by the Western countries. Is this a myth or is this true, Dr. Paul?
It is not a myth. It's a reality. It's in a reality in some of these countries, because again, the context here is that the transitioning from the colonial power to self-independence is like a child that comes out of a womb, but the umbilical cord has not been cut. And you would imagine there is very limited, if there is any chance of survival in such a scenario. It doesn't happen in human beings, though, but that's the closest ideology example I can be able to give in this case to understand why there is that narrative that Western countries still do interfere with African countries. And if you look at it closely, it's those countries that are still strongly connected to their colonial masters, where there is significant influence by the colonial masters on their daily affairs of the nation state. And there is very little room by the nation state to confront the colonial master and say, this far and no farther. And the difficulty to confront that tension has resulted to insubordination, to the extent that some of the countries literally live from the West, not on the continent. They are placed in the continent, but live from the West. And probably you may have, just one example, you may have traveled from Africa to Europe. And in some countries, you have to go to Europe, you have to go through African country to get there. Yeah, you cannot go there directly, simply because there is this pseudo arrangement between nation states that somebody has to pass through the colonial master's territory before you go there. And so it is not a myth, it's a reality. We have seen it also being expressed in the way economic aspirations of African countries are determined, and there is always this tendency that African countries are always seen to be on the other side of the table. In other words, begging for existence and begging for support, as if they are not able to do it for their own. But let me tell you, my brothers, you and I know in leadership, nobody arrives at that stage without being led there. So there is this, what I would call permission that we have allowed ourselves as African countries to allow the extent of influence that, to a great extent, in my view, dehumanizes or takes away the dignity of our African people, to the extent that...
And that's where I was coming to. I mean, we have allowed, to some extent, this interference. I don't know how you see it in your work, but I think to a great extent, we have allowed it. Why don't we cut the umbilical cord now that we have come of age and begin to develop our own systems? Or is it that our leaders have a problem So they have to keep the umbilical cord connected so that they keep getting some fringe benefits.
There's many sides to this scenario, why we have arrived to where we are, and we cannot correct what we see that makes us unhappy before identifying why in the first place did we end up there. You see,
Yes.
so we need to start addressing the cause of factors that have led us to a place of subserviency as a continent. And one part of that is because the leadership, our leadership, and the ruling political elite, to some extent, because of the difficulties of interest, some are self-interest, some are national interests that do not embrace citizen interest, that have culminated to poor negotiating capabilities in favor of African people. And so maybe perhaps one of the positive things that we could perhaps acclaim as a positive step towards gaining our face as a continent and our voice and our dignity on global platforms is the establishment of a structure like the African Free Trade Agreement, where now we are starting thinking, maybe if we have a collective voice, we are able to trade better at a global space rather than as an independent country approaching a Western country to increase her share of trading. So maybe that's one positive spread, but we have learned that so late in the day that we are now actually now stuck in the details. How do we work together? Because of the colonial past and the many years of self-rule that has also strained our inter-country relationships, there is a huge level of mistrust. And therefore, it's crossing the barrier from where we are at the moment, even mentally, psychologically, to the space of abilities that we can do this thing together. We can trade better amongst ourselves and increase our own share in the global market is still a challenge. However, I must say that there is good progress being made, given the number of countries that have ratified the agreement. For example, if we talk about African trade, that they are moving towards that direction. The other thing that we have seen in the fight against COVID-19, we are seeing an increasing collective nature of African leaders putting a force together, trying to prompt Western and Northern countries to start thinking about Africa as equal humans. In other words, to stop hoarding vaccines because they already have enough. There are other people in this part of the world that need those vaccines if we all think about our shared humanity. So my response to that, we say we are seeing gradual progress towards our collective addressing of the issues as African voices, but there is still much to be done to be able to cross the mental barriers, the psychological barriers, the inequities, income inequities, and other differentials that really weaken our capacity to put up a collective voice on a global platform.
Wonderful thoughts right there. If you're joining us, this is the Raw Leadership Talk, brought to you live from the Africa Center for Public Speaking. And we are glad today to have Dr. Paul Kariuki joining us all the way from Durban, South Africa. Where are you connecting with us from? And we would like to hear your thoughts. If you have any thoughts, even as we move forward, your observation, get involved. Engage with us in this particular discussion. Dr. Paul, elections in Africa are still a volatile issue. Why is it so? And what can African countries do then to necessitate smooth transitions?
Dan, there are many factors that have led to a situation where we see elections in Africa to become a very volatile exercise rather than a happy exercise. It should be a very happy exercise because it's a demonstration of political maturity in a society, but at the same time also saying that, you know, we appreciate the principles of democracy and we are able to appreciate the fact that leadership change is not a weakness. And so what we have seen, I would group the main factors that really contribute to the volatility to three things. One is our weak institutionalization of democratic systems and processes. We started well as a continent in many countries, but over time, as I said earlier, we have seen a continual erosion of those systems by allowing self-interest to supersede citizens' interest, because any public leadership opportunity, it's not about serving the individual, it's about serving the public, the masses. And when we start overriding the processes that help us to maintain a cautionary advocacy level around individuals leading countries, then we start weakening the systems that should help us to emphasize governance, good governance. So that weakness is one of the contributing factors that create volatility situations around elections. The second aspect is what I call the rise of neo-patrimonial character of the state. In other words, neo-patrimonialism is a state where individuals in the ruling elite start using state resources to buy favors or loyalty from their clients, whoever the clients may be. And when that gets to that point, we see an increase of what we're seeing right now in many countries on Africa and even around the world, not only in Africa, corruption, where political elite becomes so susceptible to corruptive practices to the extent they will sell a nation to protect their interest. And the third factor is what I would call the nature of contestation of the political power itself. In other words, we are seeing less and less appreciation of political competitiveness, which is one of the important aspects of a thriving democracy. We must have political competitiveness, but it doesn't have to end up being violent. Yeah? And by nature, politics are competitive. That's why we have opposition and then we have the ruling elite. But they don't have to be violent for us to be able to appreciate and say that democracy doesn't work. Democracy does work. It depends on how we define what democracy is. So for me, those three big factors contribute to the state why we see elections becoming a volatile issue on our continent, and it's a very sad state, my brother.
Oh, wonderful thoughts there. And I believe that we need to do something. And as you have said, if our leaders will begin to look at it from that particular positive attitude and begin to approach it in the right way, then we'll begin to have good transitions in this particular continent. Dr. Paul, we are bringing this show to an end. I don't know, what are your final thoughts on this particular issue of leadership and governance in the continent of Africa?
I think there are 5 things I would like to leave our viewers with as points of thoughts, and perhaps maybe sometime we can get into deeper conversations around them. Firstly, it's to strengthen our democratic and governance systems. They have eroded to an extent that we are seeing contestations that have led to violence, and electoral violence, for example, is damaging psychologically, physically, and structurally. And that's not what it does, because it draws our attention from the most important things like development that we need so badly on this continent. Secondly, I would like to say that we need to return to the respect of the Constitution and the rule of law. Yeah, we cannot build strong societies when we undermine our own constitutions and undermine the rule of law. We create a negative precedence that the next generations that pick up leadership opportunities decide, and that's the way to live, and you constantly see an erosion of good governance and things that should be really inspiring development. The other aspect is to really make sure that we raise leaders that can always supersede self-interests and really serve the public, and become conscious of that fact, that we stop things that we have been seeing lately on our continent. For example, election term, lengthening of election terms, and people want to stay in power for long. We're seeing that it will go to an extent of even destroying the very foundations that made democracy work in the first place. Because now self-interest and what I described as a neo-patrimonialism becomes the way of life. And when it becomes the way of life, then it becomes those who are closest to political power becomes the people with the real power, and not the public or the masses that should be governing together with the state so that they can prosper their welfare. And lastly, to make sure that we deal decisively with those things that continually threaten our democracy: corruption, poor leadership, and other things that we can name. The list is so long. We must deal with those things very, very decisively as a continent if we are going to make sure that we have what I would call good international citizenship. Whenever we have conflict and jeopardize and threaten our own existence as a continent, we also jeopardize our international social capital or political capital, and it's not in our favor. We need to make sure that our international diplomacy remains sustainable in a way that it allows us to be accepted in those global platforms where we need to be listened to, so that we can shift policies in favor of our African continent. And I think there is hope for that, but there needs to be a clear, deliberate intention to move towards that direction.
Wonderful points right there, Dr. Paul, and we really appreciate. Time will not allow us to continue, but we will definitely bring you back to the Raw Leadership Talk. Our country is geared up towards the election for 2022, and I'm sure such kind of discussion will be very beneficial to the people of Kenya. And I'm sure you, being one of us, you'll be more than happy to
definitely. I'll be more than happy.
Wonderful knowledge. Thank you very much, and may God bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in. Charity Kanoru, I see you watching from Mombasa. Desire Tuishemeze watching from Bujumbura, Burundi. And Jackson Momanyi watching from Rongai. Thank you very much for tuning in, even those who didn't say anything, but you are here, tuned in and connected with us. We really, really appreciate. Till next Tuesday, same time, same place. Let's meet here at the Raw Leadership Talk. May God bless you, and see you next time.
Thank you.